In this video, I'll be running through why demand gen campaigns don't actually generate demand. We've done our first GeoLift experiment on demand gen campaigns with a significant budget to be able to actually test whether they work or not. And if they do work, what are they actually impacting? Is it new customer revenue or is it returning customer revenue? Now, not only that, in this video, I'll be going through the framework in which we approached this particular test. We didn't use a third-party GeoLift experiment, but instead we used some basic correlation analysis at a state-by-state level to put an experiment together that is good enough to be able to test variance from the expected revenue over the course of the 21-day period in which we made this test. Now, I want to add some caveats. Caveat number one is this is one single GeoLift test. This is not a conclusion that demand gen campaigns do not work. In fact, they actually do work in this particular experiment, but in a way that you probably don't expect. The second caveat is that we could have approached this through using an actual GeoLift incrementality tool, which we will do in future instances to gain more confidence or less confidence in whether demand gen campaigns actually work. So let's firstly dive into the approach that we took here. How do we actually formulate the experiment? And then I'll give you the results of the experiment and whether it worked or didn't and how much lift we actually saw. In terms of the approach here, what we did within the Australian market, this is easier than other markets because there's more states, but you can apply the exact same methodology, which is that we take the states and we take monthly orders. And what we want to look for is correlation in the movement of order pattern across the year between different states. So for example, if Victoria's orders go up, does Queensland orders go up linearly in conjunction with that, or does it not? And so we're trying to find the states that pair well, that follow each other, that we can then use as predictive models in the holdout experiment. And we do that here through a basic correlation analysis. So we take the two states and we look for the correlation between the order volume across the month. Now, could this be improved? Absolutely. You could do this at a daily level. You could impose seasonality. You could have multiple years worth of data. There's a lot of different things that you could do to significantly improve this analysis. But for this particular purpose, because we were approaching it with quite a large budget test, it just wasn't required. You don't need to go too aggressive in terms of the data science here to be able to draw a statistically relevant conclusion. From there, we also go and isolate p-values and we look for state selection that's going to make the most sense. And in this case, what we ended up selecting was Victoria and Queensland. There was a very high correlation between these two states following each other on a monthly basis. Then we started doing cross-correlation. So we wanted to find which states were the best predictor of all other states' revenue. And that ended up coming down to the same selection, which was Queensland and Victoria. And so the idea here is that we will run the test in these two states. These are the states in which we will spend the money. And then we will look at the other states to be able to determine the holdout and whether there was lift or not. From here, we've taken a baseline daily amount of orders for the Queensland and Victoria region over the course of the last 12 months. Now, this is a continuing growing business. And so this is, once again, there's a little bit of flaw in this approach, but it's good enough for this particular instance, the volume that they're doing and the spend that we were willing to deploy in this particular test. From there, the length of the test was 21 days. There was actually a few reasons behind this just due to changes that were being made within the business, so we didn't want any conflating factors. And then we did a baseline order calculation for this time period. And so based on the historical data, we should see about 2.5 thousand orders over this time period. So we calculate the point estimate for 95% confidence and 90% confidence accordingly if we have a lower bound and we have an upper bound. And then we do a calculation for the orders required to actually hit that lower and upper bound. So this is effectively saying that if we drop below this many orders in lift, it is not statistically relevant at a 95% confidence. If we go above, and I've hit the wrong button, if we go above 254 in lift, then we have statistical confidence that it's actually going to work. And so from there, we have an assumed CAC for this particular experiment, and then we know the relevant budgets. And so this is how we came to the conclusion of budget selection for this particular test. We then also have 90% confidence budgets. In this case, we opted for 90% confidence because we were fairly in the middle on whether this would actually work. There wasn't a high degree in confidence that this will definitely work and raise new customer acquisition. There also wasn't too much skepticism. We wanted to keep our mind open. And so that's why we selected 90% confidence, so we could be less aggressive on the budget. From there, we then went and rolled out the test. And we measured two different delineations of orders. We measured returning customer orders and we measured new customer orders. Now, in Vic and Queensland during this time period, we saw a 6.8% lift in orders period on period. In the rest of Australia, we actually saw a dip. And so the expectation was 1,211. We achieved 1,521. And so there seemed to be a significant lift in returning customer revenue and returning customer orders from running this demand gen campaign. And so if we just look at the total spend here and we use that to calculate an incremental CAC on returning customers, which isn't the best approach. I probably wouldn't recommend actually viewing this kind of data in this way, but just isolating this out as its own variable, cost per returning customer order was $39. Now, this is very profitable. This was a large increase. Is this necessarily something that we want to continue to spend on aggressively to drive returning customer revenue? No, you'd prefer to do this through direct free communication channels, but it's interesting. It's not a bad result. What if we move into new customer orders? Well, new customer orders in the rest of Australia went down by 4.5%. In Vic and Queensland, it went down by 1.41%. And so our expected order count was 2,771. The actual was 2,857. That's a difference of 85. Just coming back here, for this to be statistically relevant, we needed a lift of at least 166. And so this does not have statistical relevancy. However, if you still want to make an ICAC calculation, you can. And so $140, which is not profitable on acquisition. Now, yes, there's a CAC payback period that would make that profitable, but on first purchase acquisition, this is not profitable. This was not a good exchange. The data doesn't matter anyway because it's not even statistically relevant. And so we can't even prove with 90% confidence that this is even true and that the demand gen campaign actually led to any of this lift. And so ultimately, the conclusion of this GeoLift experiment, for this particular account, in the way that it was ran, was that it in fact did not generate demand, as you would think, in the naming convention of the campaign, but instead it did a somewhat decent job, a statistically relevant job at going and retargeting existing customers, likely through the Gmail channel, likely through display, YouTube, etc., and then was able to generate a lift there. And so the conclusion and the next steps off the back of this experiment is that we are going to continue to run this campaign, but at a significantly reduced budget, and we're viewing it as a retargeting campaign on returning customers. Will we do a future holdout experiment where we pull it out of retargeting and we look at the impact that it has on returning customer orders? Definitely. For now, I think that we just take the win, continue to see if this lift continues, or whether it was just a short-term spike that was generated here. And the nice thing to know is that this correlates very, very closely with all of the other external data that we've seen from other agencies and other YouTube channels that have put out content around demand gen, which is that everyone that I have seen so far that has tested this campaign in a very controlled way, like we have here, has seen the same results. Practically no lift in new customer orders. And if there is a lift, it's an instantaneous lift from demand gen quickly going after people that are already in the funnel, already warm, capitalizing on all of that pre-existing top of funnel traffic. And then after that is exhausted, it just does nothing, or it goes after returning customers. It ends up burning budget. It's not very incremental. And so just worth considering when you're going and putting these tests into your own accounts, I would be looking closely at returning customer order lift in conjunction with new customer order lift. And if you want a relatively rudimentary, simple approach to just doing some state selection, deciding how you're going to set up the experiment, determining the budget requirements for the experiment, this is a relatively good model to do so. If you're an e-commerce brand and you want direct access to this model and a walkthrough for your particular brand, please reach out. Happy to provide this too.